Death of Hope, a relatively recently released new fan-animated 40k video, and it is pretty goddamn awesome, especially in its ambience, and so I figured we'd finally have a look at it. With these fan-created projects, I like to just let it be a few days before I do any commentary or analysis on it, because I want it to grow naturally rather than having any potential views or attention siphon off to different videos, which I'm almost a little bit paranoid will happen whenever you're making any kind of commentary on this. It's one of the reasons why I do despise reaction channels, but that personal grudge is neither here nor there. So, we are going to have a little bit of an analysis here. We're not going to be looking at the whole video. We're just going to be pointing out some of the coolest and most interesting parts, both from just a pure awesome perspective and a lore perspective. So if you want to go see the full video, I will have left a link to it in the description below, assuming I haven't forgotten, as I frequently do. Anywho, let's get into it. And let's start with the second strongest point of the video, the ambiance. The sheer brutality of it, the grim darkness of it, the horror of it, the mutilation of the Space Marines scattered across the hull of this behemoth spacecraft in the void. This is actual grimdark, and I love it. We've been seeing a little bit less grimdark in 40k and 30k as of late, in my opinion, and it's really cool to see a little bit of a return to that older, darker aesthetic. I also love seeing the Mark II and III power armor and the damage done to it as well. Again, we return to that brutality of warfare, of Legiones Astartes combat. They don't have little slices cut in their armor or tiny little entry wounds. No, there are fist-sized chunks blown out of them. There are decapitations. There is mutilation. This is Astartes on Astartes combat. When superhumans are fighting one another, it is all about maximum trauma delivered. And it really does get that across, which I adore. It's also nice to just see a bunch of the older patterns of armor. I think we can see mostly Mark III, maybe the odd Mark II, maybe the odd Mark IV as well, and also some improvised Mark V, the so-called heresy pattern. You can tell by the ginormous studs worked into the armor. That was an ad hoc additional defensive measure, because it was revealed that standard power armor offered some resistance to bolt weaponry, but nowhere near enough. And the idea of adding in those massive studs was essentially to add in reinforced rivets into the armor. And the result of this was that when the armor was struck by a bolt round, a segment would be blown apart. A segment of Ceramite would be destroyed, cracked, and flung away. But due to the rivets reinforcing the surrounding armor portions, they would remain mostly intact, therefore, by and large, preserving the integrity of the armor overall. But if that is only the second best part, what is the best part? Well, it's this. It's these guys, these ghouls, these apparitions, these demon-infested puppets of flesh, these half-real monstrosities. The horror feel of this piece is excellent. And honestly, so the creator himself said that he's not particularly fond of animating stuff, and that he claims not be very good at it. Oh, if this is not very good, then right, well, I mean, I'll take his word for it, I suppose, even if I might disagree to some extent. But the somewhat stilted movements of these monsters on occasion, I actually think heightens the creepiness factor. I think it enhances rather than subtracts from the horror factor. I maintain that, like, modern day movie monsters, the perfect 3D CGI things, they're not that scary because you can see at them, and even though whilst they might look good, you know, the CG is perfect and all that, you still know it's not real. You immediately recognize on some primeval level that this is a computer-generated image, and so you're just kind of not that fazed by it. At least I'm not. But the old kind of, like, stop-motion animations, I find that way creepier because it is inhuman. It is recognizably and immediately inhuman. It is something that is clearly wrong and should not exist. It is a monster, and your brain immediately recognizes it as such. And that is absolutely present throughout this entire video. The demons, the way they flicker in and out, the way they move, the way their spine, their heads just kind of wobble and snap back and forth. It is beautiful. The most part too is the traitor Space Marines don't give a shit. To them, that is, I love that too, because it shows you how deep the horror has gotten in the traitor legions. They will just walk past them. A flickering monster's apparition walking down the hallway. It's nothing. It's a part of everyday life in the warp for the traitors. Like, oh. That I love. It shows again just how deep they've goddamn fallen, you know? It is excellent. Oh, yes. And then there's this big old bad boy. This is a real flash from the goddamn past. This is a super early pattern of Terminator armor, or tactical dreadnought armor if you prefer. I believe it has, I don't think it has been given a proper designation, but it is called most likely, or most usually, Saturnine pattern Terminator armor. It was one of the very first models created and is basically a prototype pattern. The Mechanicus wanted to provide the Legions Astartes with a greater degree of protection, because as the Legions advanced out into the galaxy, they ran into more and more shit capable of trunching power armor. And so they designed a pattern with increased protection based upon massive exoskeletal suits used by old Terran engineers before the fall, designed to operate within the massive reactor cores of spaceships or meteoric debris fields. The resultant suit of armor was ludicrously heavily armored, but also extraordinarily unwieldy, shall we say. They offered a degree of protection practically unmatched by any suit after it, but they were also very immobile and not very maneuverable. By and large, it almost reduced the Legionnaire to the status of a semi-mobile turret, albeit a very heavily armed and armored one. And due to its lack of mobility, Legiones warfare quite often being highly mobile, it was later rejected in favor of the more flexible pattern of cataphracti armor, which was the first to enter into proper mass production. Nevertheless, it is really cool to see one of these super old suits moving. And here we see the results of the Ultramarine Assault described in the opening paragraphs. You may notice that this Ultramarine and the one back there are literally embedded within the decking, yet they don't appear to be mutilated like many of the other Ultramarine corpses that we've seen scattered throughout the ship as, well, de facto decorations. That's because these probably haven't actually been killed in combat, but probably, what was launched upon this ship was a teleportarum assault. And teleportation technology, even in the relatively high-tech 31st millennium, is a wee bit on the temperamental side. And when you're trying to teleport warriors on board something that might be moving, like a ship for example, you're gonna have to do it very, very carefully. But it was suggested that this was essentially a desperate last-bid counter-assault, so they may simply have just tried to dump as many Legionnaires aboard the vessel as possible, as quickly as possible in a bid to seize the spaceship, and in so doing, some of their brave brethren met their end lodged in between spaceship decking, which would almost certainly lead to near instantaneous death, even for a transhuman super soldier. It's not particularly healthy to materialize within deck plating, as I'm sure you'd understand. And this charming locale appears to be some form of gladiatorial pit, a tradition quite favoured by the World Eaters, who've clearly made themselves at home on this vessel. There are word bearers aboard as well, but mostly world eaters, so I'd guess this is probably a world eater's ship. Again, judging by the decor, it certainly seems like their kind of thing. And I like also this big guy here. You can see he has laurels seemingly stapled onto his head. You can also see what appears to be black carapace implants, and they might in fact both be Adeptus Astartes, stripped down and then pitted against another. Perhaps a world eater versus an ultramarine. I can't quite make out the first guy. He too does appear to have the black carapace, so he's probably an Astartes, and I think he also has butcher's nails augments. At very least it looks like it from the back of his head there. And this would absolutely be the kind of pastime the World Eaters would indulge in, forcing captured prisoners to fight both each other's and each other as well, to prove their worth, to prove their value and superiority. Oh yeah, that is definitely something the World Eaters would go for. And speaking of decorative items designed to increase the feng shui of a space, this poor bastard, good God. Oh yeah, this is some grimdark shit. So, this appears to be an ultramarine, judging by the tattoo on his forehead, that has been hung up on the wall, giant metal spikes rammed through his flesh, kept alive by dark technology or sorcery at this point. It's just, he's hanging there, mutilated, in certainly indescribable pain as he has to watch. He's probably an officer as well. I can't see any service studs on his brow, but I'm just assuming officer because, again, that would be the cuntish thing to do. Hang the officer responsible for the Ultramarine segment on the world up on the wall to watch his men be forced to fight to their deaths. Watch them get slowly corrupted by the gladiatorial bouts of the World Eaters. That is just cruel and unusual. And here we perhaps have the mastermind of this somewhat assholish form of punishment, a Night Lord of the 8th Legion. Interesting, for him to be aboard a vessel filled with world eaters and word bearers in the middle of the Shadow Crusade against McCrag. A bit of a specialist, perhaps, maybe. They do have a rather Night Lordy plan, after all. But before we get to that, here we have an Eldar. When I first saw him, I was thinking, oh hey, this is maybe going to be some kind of hero, a special dude. Then he gets murdered in the arena a few moments later, so apparently not, but hey. It was a decent guess at first, I suppose. And this lady. So, I have some theories surrounding her. You can see the baby she has clutched in her arms. There are claw marks on the side of its head, as if it tried to claw its own skull in. I think also due to her mutations, or markings, or mutilations perhaps, I think she might be some form of mutant psyker, maybe. Or due to her faith in the Emperor, as we will see later on, perhaps the wordbearers took offense and decided to mutilate her, decided to break her faith, however possible. Perhaps. I like the mutant psyker idea one, though, because that might turn her into a little bit of a bomb, essentially, at some point. And this guy. Big, dirty World Eater. Note how he's literally covered in blood and offal and all manners of horrible dried nonsense. The World Eaters were, well, how do I put it? They eventually decided that there was honor in blood, in Vita. It was a color favored by their new lords and by Angron as well, and therefore washing their armor wasn't all that important anymore. Eventually, they'd start painting their armor red as well, but the original World Eater Berserkers, they were not red because of any layer of paint. They were reddened literally by gore. Which is quite some dedication to the cause, is it not? And speaking of red paint, here we have the Ultramarine leader who led the boarding action. You can see that his helmet is covered by daubs of red. This was a mark of censor, although at this point it's a bit interesting that he still has it. It sounds as if, from the intro, this is a fair bit into the Shadow Crusade, when Guilliman has essentially declared victory, and at that point, a red helmet should no longer be a mark of censor. In fact, it should be a mark of honor and privilege after the action on Calth, which makes me a little bit suspicious about one point here in the future. The wordbearer states that their plan is to reanimate the bodies of the Space Marines and use them as a kind of a terror formation against their brethren, to march their shells onto the streets of the next world, suggesting that they're referring either to possessing them or their armor, which is where we get to something a bit... So here we see what appears to be a group of Ultramarines standing together, or at least their battered armor. Now, their armor doesn't show signs of something that might have killed them. There's impacts, there's craters, there's damage, but there's nothing that would suggest lethality, at least not I could see. Then you hear the voice of the leader, presumably saying, "Let's begin." Now, you can also see in the background one guy carrying a bolter. Now, he's the same guy who was in the room with the wordbearer challenging the Ultramarine, leading me to suspect that these are traitors now wearing the suits of armor of deceased Ultramarines. At first, I thought maybe they've managed to break free somehow, but I still kind of believe that theory a little bit, because again, a mark of censure is something that the word bearers would still believe. Red helmet might mean censure, but within the Ultramarines Legion after Calth, they would know that that is not the case. So maybe he's a veteran sergeant, sent some kind of deep infiltration mission to pretend to be captured. It feels like too much of a stretch. I tried to recognize the voice of the guy speaking, but I can't quite place it in comparison with the other Ultramarines or the wordbearers. So I'm a bit 50-50 on whether or not there are traitors in the armor of Ultramarines, or if they are Ultramarines that somehow managed to escape, or I don't know. I'm a bit 50-50 on it. And again, I think primarily it's probably traitors in Ultramarine armor. But I'm a little bit divided on that. And finally, a note on this lad, with the spikes and the horns and the gubbins sticking out of his armor. This is a possessed word-bearer. They, of course, being the first legion to begin welcoming demons into their flesh. It was indeed seen as a great honor to be chosen by one of the never-born. Many of them didn't necessarily quite see it as the blessing they had been told it was afterwards, but it was certainly, again, a great honor to become one with their new god's favored servants. And seeing as this wordbearer is partaking in the gladiatorial games, I imagine he's one of the guys who thinks this is a good thing. A wordbearer deigning to engage in the brutish barbaric rituals of the World Eaters. He's clearly a bit more of a savage sort, isn't he? All in all, I can't wait to see some more of this. I want to see where this story goes, whether those are actually Ultramarines, or indeed, as I suspect, just wordbearers and world eaters in their new armored get-ups, engaging in some terror tactics probably taught to them by our mysterious 8th Legion stowaway. Alternatively, he could have his own ideas as well. The 8th Legion is a famously unpredictable legion after all, and he was somewhat lacking in overt chaos iconography, in blood and filth like the others. Maybe, just maybe, our 8th Legionnaire is not who we think he is. Although, that is perhaps a little bit too much speculation based on nothing more than the fact that he appears to wash his armor on occasion. Anywho, yes, this is excellent stuff. It is grim, dark nonsense of the finest form. And I can't wait, as mentioned, to see some more of it. Some more grim, dark horror. Some more honestly, just flat out scary shit in 30 and 40k, because I think the universes really do need a bit more of that, especially in these days when it is getting a little bit sanitized on occasion. Anywho, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and again, do go check out the full video itself down in the description below. Till next time, have a good day.